So it's a 1997 Jeep Wrangler. We're going to be doing a lift kit and shocks on it and a full front bushing refresh. We're going to start on the rear, and I'll kind of show the process as we go, but it should be hopefully pretty simple. Okay, so we're going to pull these rear shocks off so that way the spring will be detensioned to get ready to put this in. We're figuring out the orientation right now, and then once those are in, we'll be able to put the brand new shocks on. Okay, the shock is out. The bottom one was an 18 and a 15 millimeter, and then the top two were both 13 millimeters with threaded nut inserts. So once the other side's off, we should be able to pull the whole axle down and get this spring popped out. We've got the McPherson strut compressors compressing the spring for the new shock and the spring perch extension, and then those new bolts will be for what I'm removing right now, which is the mount for the new lift kit. So we're going to get this pulled out and then we'll install that in. So we were able to stand on the brake drum right here and push it down enough to get the new perch in. So now we've just got to put the old bump stop mount in through this hole with the supplied hardware, and we can put the new the old bump stop back in, so that way this thing has the same amount of articulation, but it's what, 2 inches taller. So we're going to work on putting that back in. So the supplied bolt goes from a 15 to a 17. So we were able to get it lined up and get it started. So I'm going to get this side tightened down. We'll do the other side next. All right, so the new perch and the bump stops are in along with the new shocks. So we're going to lower this down. We'll work on the front of it tomorrow. All right, we got the sway bar end links disconnected on both sides. I'm getting ready to push it up out of the way, and then we'll start by removing the steering links, and then we'll start pulling the knuckles apart because we've got to replace pretty much everything in the front suspension. And so we're starting here, and then once that droops out of the way, we'll pull the shock and make pulling the spring a lot easier. All right, the upper link was a 15 mil on top, and then T55 Torx with an 18 millimeter, and so we got those removed. It is out, and so we're gonna get the shock pulled out next, so that way the axle will droop. All right, so the shock pulled out is a through bolt with a nut. It was double 13 on the bottom, and then it was a 15 up top. So those came out, and now everything's loose to where we'll be able to unbolt this bump stop here and get this spring out for the spring puck. And then we're also going to be redoing the upper and lower ball joints. So we'll need to pull this whole assembly apart to get to those. And then we'll be doing this absorber here for the steering, that drag link, and this link here. So we're gonna work on getting the spring out next. All right, so I got the caliper disconnected, I got the brake rotor off, and we're working on getting that steering arm disconnected, so that way the axle will droop way more, and then this spring will pop right out. We might even need to remove the bump stop mount, so we'll see how that goes. All right, so we used a pickle fork and a hammer to separate the steering arm from this pitman arm here, and so we got that one and that one separated from the knuckle. We're going to be doing this knuckle next. So just remove the cotter pin, remove the bolt or the nut, and then we'll use this to separate them because we're replacing them anyway, so if the boots get damaged, it doesn't really matter. And then once that's off, we'll have a lot more access to replace all these parts. All right, so we got this one removed. Now we're gonna get the steering stabilizer out. All right, so this is the pitman arm. We're gonna remove it with the pickle fork, and then hopefully it'll let the axle drop down. All right, the pitman arm is released. We're gonna lower the jack down. It looks like the pitman arm wasn't holding anything up. It's probably the 4 links that hold the axle straight are what's holding it up. So it doesn't have enough movement, so we're going to be putting the spring compressors on here to get these shrunk enough to get them out. Alright, so we shrunk down the spring and we got it out of the spring perch. So now we're going to get ready to put this spacer in up here. and then we'll shrink down the spring a little bit more with the compressors, so that way we can get it back in there. All right, so the axle dropped, but we still can't quite get this spacer in there with the spring. So I'm gonna shrink this spring down with the strut compressors, these ones here, and get this put in, and then we'll jack it all up and we'll do steering after. All right, so we got the spring in with the spring compressors and the lift block is in there. So now we're gonna get all this jacked back up and we'll start putting the steering and the sway bar end links in. We were gonna do the ball joints, but they look good enough now, and we're trying to get this done sooner than later. So we're gonna do the steering and we'll call that good for now, and we can always do the ball joints later. All right, we got the old drag link out, so it goes in here and it's got this keeper on the end of it, and it's a T50. So we're gonna get the new drag link installed on, which isn't adjustable, so that one's super simple, and then we'll move on to the steering after. All right, so we were having trouble getting it lined up, so we've got a ratchet strap over there, and then we pulled the axle sideways. I jacked up the axle on this side to pivot it this way, and then I used this one to shove the new arm up in place, and now we just got to bolt it in. All right, the pitman arm is fully installed along with the spacer, so now we just got to move on to all the steering component. All right, so I'm measuring from this link over to this one, and it's measuring about 26 1/4. So we're going to reset this length to the same thing, and then we'll do the same thing for this other link over here with these two, and then we'll figure out what that length is next after we do this one. So the next link that we have from end to end is right at about 42. So we're going to set this up to 42 inches in between these two. We do have to reuse this bar, so we'll undo this clamp and we'll undo the clamp down there, and we'll disconnect them, and then we'll put the brand new parts in and we'll just set them at the same length. Alright, well, I'm going to take a break from the steering over there and get started on the shocks on both sides. Start knocking out some of the easier stuff. I might even do the sway bar end links, and then I'll do the steering, because there's quite a bit of measuring and quite a bit of arms and movement and everything, so I'll probably need help with those. But I'm going to get the shocks done next. Alright, the new top hardware is 14, and then you have to reuse the bottom ones, which are still 13s. And then I gotta remember to put this clamp on as well to hold the spring down. Alright, I got the spring holder on. So, alright, the spring holder's on. Now time to finally do the sway bar end links. Alright, so this sway bar end link is started. I got the other side started as well. So I'm gonna fully tighten these down, and then I get to move on to the steering. Alright, so the top bolt's a 14, and then the bottom bolt's still that T55 with an 18 on the other side. So I'm going to go do the other one, and then we'll move on to the steering finally after that. Alright, so this is our pretty much on the money steering. We measured everything to fit, and so I got to put that one and that knuckle there. I got to put this in the steering box, and I got to put that one and that knuckle over there. And then I can install the shock, and this thing will be done. Alright, so all that's left is the shock, which attaches here and to there. This kit did not come with instructions, so there's going to be a little bit of trial and error to get some of the spacers done. I know that this one goes in there because the helical section only fits in one way. But I got this tightened down, that's tightened down, just needs a cotter pin. Same thing here, just needs a cotter pin. This one needs a spacer of some sort, because the cotter pin's not going to do anything with where it's at right now. So I'll probably put a washer in there, and then this one just needs to be lined up and get a cotter pin put in as well. So I'm going to work on getting the shock mounted, and then I'll do all of those all at the same time. Alright, it's all finalized. It's all grease zerks are put in, cotter pins are in, they're all lined up. All these clamps are tightened. Shocks mounted, sway bar end links are done. All of it's finished, so now I just got to throw the wheels and tires on and drop this thing back on the ground. Alright, the wheels are on, it's back on the ground. You can tell from the first clip, I'll put it up right here, that it is definitely a lot taller. So I'm going to get it pulled outside so that way I can get my garage space back.